Let me introduce you to the newest free online event coming to the homeschool community. Homeschool Connect Expo is totally free and totally online with over 70 speakers and 120 exhibitors. All online and all on demand, March 28th through the 30th. Our online expo provides everything a traditional convention has to offer without the hassles or costs, making it convenient for you. Sponsors are PureFlix, AOP, Summit Ministries, and Tell Library. Again, homeschoolconnectexpo.com, March 28th through March 30th.
This podcast is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. What is creation? Did God create the world in 6 days and rest on the seventh? Does anyone really care? These questions and many more, including teaching tips and great resources, are presented in the Creation Science Podcast. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and it's my pleasure and honor to be your host. Some of these shows are from my Best of Creation expos and other presentations I've completed throughout the years of teaching on this topic. I'm the owner of Media Angels, Inc., a publishing company that produces books, audios, and videos to help you and your family in your Christian walk. Check out my books and other podcasts at mediaangels.com. To get the show notes for this broadcast, go to creationsciencepodcast.com. And now, let's learn together.
Hi, my name is Felice Gerwitz. Today I have a very special guest on the line who is my daughter, Christina Gerwitz-Moss, and she is doing a second session with us today. Our first one is on the website, so if you missed that, you'll want to catch that one first. And we talked a little bit about, Christina being homeschooled, and the fact that we decided to write this series was based on her interest in writing. This interview is going to be more about the Truth Seekers Mystery Series and about the books. So thank you, Christina, for joining me again.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad we finally got our schedules to jive so that I could be here.
Well, I'm going to give a little bit of background about the books, if that's okay with you, and then we're going to discuss each one of them.
Sounds great.
Okay, the first one is entitled The Missing Link Found. And years ago we went on a Peace River fossil float that was hosted by Tom DeRosa with the Creation Studies Institute. And Tom DeRosa is actually one of our speakers for this expo, so you'll want to go find one of his sessions as well as one of our sponsors. He's actually sponsored twice with his publisher, Master Books, as well as he did a sponsorship with Creation Studies Institute. And when we went on the Peace River fossil float, we were fascinated because of the things that we found, and it's a freshwater excavation that is, they have found some mammoth bones and that sort of thing. So when we were writing our first book, I said to Christina, when we write, it's easier to write what we know. So let's talk about what we could write about. And Christina immediately thought about the fossil float. So we set the book in Florida on the Peace River, which is in Arcadia. And oddly enough, that's where your husband lived part of his life, isn't it? Growing up?
Yes. When I talk about writing this book, and I was telling him about the campground and how it was a real place, and he said, "Oh, I know that campground. We used to run there as kids and play with the owner's kids at the campground." So yes, it is funny that came back into our lives.
Oh, funny. And so we wrote this book based in Florida, so it has to do with the missing link being found, and that Anna and Christian, the main characters in the book, their dad is involved in that his brother, who is in charge of this dig, has taken ill. And the father, Anna and Christian Murphy's father, Dr. Murphy, has a degree in anthropology, but he is a photographer at this point just because he didn't want to travel as much, and have that take him away from his family. So he goes to help his brother and subsequently, they uncover and unearth this fossil, and while they're there, they have another cousin who is there, or the cousin who is there, and he is a diehard evolutionist. So Anna and Christian are trying to help their cousin understand that, evolution is a falsehood, and so there's a lot of discussion. And one of the things we did in these books was to have a dialogue between someone who is a creationist and someone who is an evolutionist to try to discuss the truth about science from a biblical standpoint. So, Christina, do you want to talk a little bit about, Anna and maybe some of her personality quirks, and then Christian?
Sure, I can talk about that. I mean, I think that Anna was just supposed to be a little bit of the voice of reason, whereas Christian was more willing to take some risks and stuff. But I also wanted to talk about, I thought you brought up an excellent point, and I don't want to miss talking about how we included the creation versus evolutionist debate in a dialogue form. And I felt like as a kid and as we were writing yearbooks and we were talking about all of the different just discussions that you could have about creation and evolution, everything that was written, I felt like, was written more from a textbook-ish type, these are the facts, this is what creationists believe, and this is what an evolutionist believes. And it was written as, this is one thing and the other, but there was nothing that was written that we had found that combined the two, so that when a kid was put in a situation that somebody didn't believe, or they started talking about millions of years or something like this, we wanted the kids to be able to think back on our discussions that were in these books and be able to say, oh, well, I know how to answer that question because Christian answered that question in the book. Or this is how he handled it when somebody was talking about how the earth couldn't possibly be thousands of years old. And so I think that was a really big part of these books, was writing this information that we knew, but writing it in a dialogue format so that kids could be confident in what they believed and what they were being taught from a creationist standpoint, and that they would be able to share their beliefs with others. And this would help them be confident in sharing their beliefs because they had read it and they were understanding it from a question and answer, or in a dialogue form.
Right. And then one of the things, too, that I wanted to add is on our website we have hundreds of emails that people have sent us, and we pulled out some of our favorites. And one of my favorites is a young boy by the name of Samuel, and his mom wrote in, Samuel loved your books and couldn't put them down. He has recently been talking to some boys he knows that don't know the Lord about evolution. Nothing has inspired him to want to know more until he read your books. Your books have inspired him. And it goes on. But I think you're right, Christina. It was hard to get even my own kids to, want to read some books, no matter how beautifully illustrated they were, with a lot of facts. But in the story format, they were able to get a lot of the facts in a very entertaining manner that I think stuck with them. And, Anna and Christian are both teenagers, and even so, we started the books, when you publish a book, you have to say where it fits. And so we had put the books in a 12 years old and up, but it's really for younger readers that can read well. We have a vocabulary in the back of the book because of some terms that may not be familiar to the children or the parents, and we also have literature study guides that go along with them. With this book, Christina, what do you feel, kept the continuity of the story together?
Well, I think the timeline really helped with making things flow. And I don't know if you're talking about from one book to the other or within a single book.
Just within this book.
I think that it was the timeline that really helped us have things flow from one to the other. And I really liked that as much as I think Grandma was teasing you, we talked about in the last episode about wanting to read my part and not wanting to read the science part. I think we made it a big point to have the science and the learning part of the book be so ingrained and move the story in such a way that you really couldn't read it and understand it to its fullest potential without reading and understanding the science aspect of the book, which I think was really exciting for us because there just wasn't a lot of other books out there that were trying to teach as well as entertain to the level that we were trying to entertain with having the mystery and having it be the missing link that was supposed to be found, and just some other little twists and turns we had throughout the book.
Right. Well, in our second book, Dinosaur Quest at Diamond Peak, Christina decided she wanted to write about dinosaurs, and that was another one of those, Christina, we don't know anything. But at that point,
we wrote
the
about
Internet...
what we knew, so we were moving
for the
on.
first one. So it was time to explore, and so we wanted to write about that. And so I don't know why, and I'm sure it had nothing to do with me, but you picked the Rocky Mountain National Park. And I remember trying to get some pictures for the front cover of the book, and had a gentleman who was one of the naturalists there. And when he found out I was writing a creation book, he would not sell me the photograph of the mountain we wanted. I ended up having to go to like some click art place and pay quite a bit of money for that mountain. I know how much the mountain and the rock on the cover cost me. In those days, it was really expensive to get, that kind of thing. But it was amazing. And so we were in the midst of writing that when one of the people that I knew at the Creation Studies Institute, they kind of took us under their wings. When Jill, just for some backstory, when Jill Whitlock and I began writing the Creation Science Study Guides, we approached Creation Institute because we had gotten a lot of our research there, and Jill had studied creation for 10 years, and so they had tried to give us a 4-book contract for the books at the time, and we really wanted to keep them with an open study guide appeal for the homeschool community. So in doing so, they offered to read and edit the books. So we actually knew some scientists there that would read our materials, and when I came up with these novels, one of the scientists offered to read them as well as his wife, and so we had no less than 3 scientists and many editors and many kids read these books as we were writing them. So for this book in particular, they had found some blood, dinosaur bones that had blood that was not fossilized, and that was huge because for dinosaurs to be 65 million years old, as we read about in all the books, you can't have non-fossilized blood. So we made that a key in this book, that when these remains were uncovered, and of course Anna and Christian were right there and were able to participate in this dig. Is there anything you remembered about the book that you wanted to share?
No, other than obviously the not fossilized blood that was found, we got from another dig that we had researched. So that was a fact of something that was found, and so I think we got a lot of that information from our in-depth research that we did. So that was, I thought, a really interesting thing. And I remember specifically, I was thinking about the book as you were talking, and I remember this book had a lot of them debating and discussing with a couple of the other scientists and archaeologists and paleontologists that were working on the dig. And I remember a couple of those key conversations that I thought were really well done on your part, and I think we had a lot of action. We had a lot of action in there as well. But I remember some key conversations that I thought were really, that were just really well done, because I know so many kids love dinosaurs, and that sometimes they get really caught up in the millions of years. Just recently, my husband was reading a book to my children, and it was a dinosaur book, and they had something about millions of years old, and of course he read it before he thought, and then I looked at him and I said, well, you need to start editing yourself, honey. You think about it, because I think sometimes we don't realize that even when they're little, they definitely are hearing and absorbing everything. And so, of course, he thought it was funny that I was still, concerned about the millions of years, which, like I said, it's just being aware of what we're teaching our children. And so I thought there were a lot of really good discussions in that book in particular, and there were a lot of fun things that I think we tried to do in that book that were just new and different, and we took a lot of forward-thinking magazines and just some of the interesting technologies, I think. I guess you'll just have to read it to know exactly what we're talking about. But I think there were we had a lot of fun with that one in particular. I think just doing research and being able to include it in our book.
That's definitely true, and that was a really fun book. It was really challenging, but it was really fun. And then the third book, which is Keys to the Past Unlocked, is about a Spanish galleon. We're back in Florida, and we are in one of Christina's favorite places, and that is the Keys. Our family is a scuba diving family. I'm a scuba diver in card holding and name only. I've never been diving with my children. Christina told me it was a very scary thing to think about me going with her. What happens as you age, and back in those days, I was still, late 30s, early 40s, a little bit younger, and you still wouldn't let me go diving, Christina.
I don't know if I'll let myself go at this point if I wait any longer.
Oh gosh, but I had been a scuba diver in college and remember loving it, even though I had not done a lot of it. And so in those days, you could go down a lot further than they let you go today. And so a group of our friends had decided that we would get the dads to go with our older teens, and they would go take scuba classes together. So about 6 of you guys, I think, went, and 3 families, I remember, with 5 children. Yeah. And so everyone was certified, and so we tried to go to the Keys as much as we possibly could. So that seemed like a perfect locale. And, of course, Spanish galleons and buried treasure is always a high point, in a lot of stories. And so that was our basis for that. And so, we actually did research actual digs, but this one, La Senora Francesca, I think, I don't remember actually even right now if that was a real one or not, or if we just made that up. Do you remember, Christina? I'm trying to think.
I actually don't. I think that the name was from some of our research that we had done. And I know we had to do a lot of research because even though I'd done some stuff with archaeology and whatever, the underwater archaeology was definitely a lot of different techniques and things that they use. And I remember that being something that we had to research in depth so that we could talk about that. And also, obviously, I think just our love of the Keys and the ocean in general made this book a lot of fun to write, and just the aspects of adding the scuba diving. Obviously loved scuba diving and just loved all of what went along with just the sea life and everything with that. So yes, this was a great book. I don't know about that in particular though, the name.
Well, right. Well, the thing is that, as you can see, I'm pretty fearless about going out in public and saying that I don't remember, but that was, a little bit of time ago anyway. One of the things we did in the book is we had factual science facts intertwined with the storyline. So the story is a fiction, but the facts were true. And so when we dealt with, like Christina said, with the underwater scene, what could you possibly use as a a source of, some sort of evolutionary creation thing. And I remember kind of being stuck on that, and we had at that point had a deadline. I had pre-sold those books, so from the publishing end of the house, I was pretty stressed about getting that book out there. Plus, of course, we had a homeschool conference to go to, a big one, and that was always really good to give us a deadline. So when we were working on that book, I remember coming into Christina's room and looking on your bookshelves, because you always had such great books. Also, Christina has that creative decorating side of the house that I don't have, and they were always artistically arranged. So even if I came in her room and just sat and looked at her shelves, it was relaxing to me. So I remember looking, and I found a book on out-of-place artifacts, or op arts, or they're called oop arts, or however you want to call them. But that book gave us the basis for what the mystery would be in the book, and it was really a cool tie-in. And once again, it was read by no less than 3 creation scientists. And the way that worked was I had used a lot of original research by Larry Vardaman, Dr. Larry Vardaman, who is with the Institute for Creation Research, ICR. And so when I had given the book to our lady, actually it was one of the scientists at ICR, his wife was an editor, and she always read the books for us, Jan did. And so she was reading one of our books, editing it, sitting in her car waiting for her husband when Dr. Vardaman walked by. And so she asked him, he said, "What are you doing?" And she told him what she was doing. And she said, to me later, she said, "It just hit me. Do you want him to take a look at it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And, of course, as God would have it, his office was very, very close to her husband's office. And he read just a section on the sedimentary layers, and he thought, that I had done a good job of conveying what his books and his abstracts. I read a lot of scientific abstracts. I had a whole notebook full of them, and I really enjoyed reading them. I thought they were fascinating. And only me, right, Christina?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was concentrating on the scuba diving and the sunken treasure and all the fun stuff.
I'm going through the abstracts, his only comment was he pointed out some sections that might be a little bit difficult for a normal, child to understand. So we went through and clarified those, and so it turned out to be very possibly one of the favorite books of the kids that ended up reading them, and it was really, I think by the 3rd book, Christina, we got good at writing mysteries.
And I think also that we had talked about, I had read a couple of series where the first book was fantastic, and the second book was really, really good, and the third book was just really bad. And so I know when we decided to make this a series and we talked about it, we both had come to, the conviction that we were only going to continue to write if they got better, and that and I think that hopefully that's what we did, was with each book improved not only our skills but improved what we were offering the readers in just the dialogue and how we put the book together. And I think that was a big concern on both of our minds, was just to not have people buy it just because it was, we liked the other one, but that it was the best piece of fiction that we could write at the time in and of itself, not just in the series.
That's right. And then also, the way just the Lord provided in so many of these books. The first book, the cover editor or the cover creator for my creation science books put that together, and so he set out the format of what that book was going to look like, and then he stopped doing graphic art. And so I had to hire another graphic artist for book number 2 and 3, but it came out, like you wouldn't know it was a different artist that did that. And so we needed somebody rappelling from a mountain. Again, art back then was really difficult. You couldn't just go to, some of the sites today and pay for credits and get a whole bunch of really nice art. And so I knew we needed to have somebody looking like that they were rappelling down a mountain for the Rocky Mountain one, and the Dinosaur Quest book, and then the third book, someone scuba diving. So for the second book, I had to ask one of my friends who made me get on the phone with her son, who we needed to hang from a tree in my front yard. If you remember that whole staging of that, Christina.
Yes, I do, and our friends that were the firemen that actually had rappelling gear.
Yes, and he lived a block away, and he just drove his truck over to our house, and we hung Michael from the tree, and I remember he was on his way to a basketball tournament, and he had like really white shoes, so I think the artist had to kind of tone down his shoes, but he looks like he's rappelling down from a mountain, and then at the bottom is actually that friend of ours who was a firefighter, his daughter wearing one of Christina's jackets, because her hair, Megan's hair, was just the way you described Anna's.
Right. And when we saw her, I think she had just gotten her hair cut too. When we saw her, we're like, oh, we know who Anna's going to be.
That's right. So
good thing we have good sports as friends, you know.
Oh, gosh.
Willing to go along with us.
And then for the third book, we went across the street, basically it's a couple of miles away from our house to the place where you guys took the scuba diving lessons, and just we were going to rent the tanks and everything, and you had the rest of your gear and wetsuits, and he said, oh no, I'll just loan them to you, when we told him what we wanted them for. And that was Michael's brother Eric, who also was a diver, and I talked him into coming into our swimming pool, and I was too buoyant. In fact, I even tried, I think, to put like weight belts over my legs, but I was underwater with an underwater camera trying to take a picture. And I had to go out to the front yard where my husband was doing some yard work and say, could you please hold me underwater by my shoulders in the shallow end so I could take a picture of Christina and Eric? And he said, do you want me to do what? So you got your dad to do that, and we took the picture, and it surprisingly came out great. It was, like I said, amazing how the Lord provided on us.
Especially with the quality of that underwater camera.
Yeah, it's funny. And, right. I think you're a rescue diver, Christina. I think that was the end of your diving career, was at the rescue diving level.
Well, I thought it would be fun at the time to become an instructor, but I guess that's for another time in my life. When I'm a grandma.
That's right. Well, I, again, want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about the series, and hopefully those people who are listening will get a flavor of what the books are about, and our hearts, to bring, the Lord to people, through our writing, and just, I think, creation just does an amazing job of pointing everybody back to the Creator, who is God. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks again for coming on, Christina.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot more fun and enjoyable than I was afraid it was going to be, so I appreciate it. And thank you for making me do all those things as a kid that I didn't want to do, and obviously now still as an adult. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
You can learn more about the series at www.truthseekersmysteryseries.com or on our website at mediaangels.com. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to the Creation Science Podcast. You can find the show notes at creationsciencepodcast.com. And as always, reach out to me, Felice Gerwitz, at felice@mediaangels.com. Take care, God bless, and I hope you enjoy teaching your children and learning about the beautiful world that God created. Please share this broadcast with a friend, and thanks so much.